Hey everyone, Chris here. Today we're going to continue the reveals from the 2024 Player's Handbook. Now I don't have a teleprompter, so I'm going to refer to my notes here. But in my last video, covered the main changes to the core rules. But let's face it, the big questions about the new Player's Handbook are about the meat. We want to know about the feats, the spells, the classes, and subclasses. And my goal is to show you the exact details of it as least as much as I can. So I don't know if I have my finger on the pulse of the community, but from my perspective, and I think from most of the community's perspective, what has happened with spells is maybe of the highest interest. That's why I will, of all the meaty options, cover spells first. So I'm not just going to talk about spells in general. I'm going to show you the spells on the screen in the new Player's Handbook that I think are of the most interest. So you will see how they are worded word for word. I'm not going to show you all the spells because there's almost 400 of them. So I do need to narrow that list. So I released this poll that I'm showing up on the screen to ask what kinds of spells you wanted me to cover first. And it looks like spells that were rebalanced, it came in first. So that's what I'm going to cover today. And I've decided my second video is going to cover two of these topics. Spells that weren't rebalanced that I think really could have used it, and spells with changes that leave me, scratching my head. And unfortunately, that video is going to be more negative than today's video, and so I don't want that to be the last video I do on spells. So I'm then going to cover the spells with interesting changes. These will be spells I didn't necessarily flag as needing rebalancing. In some cases, they did. But spells where they made changes that just kind of either made me smile, or I thought improved quality of life, or I just thought they had changes that were worthy of note. These were often unexpected, but I will include the final versions of all the conjuration spells in that video because we all know they got major revisions, and I'm sure a lot of you are curious what might have changed from the playtest. Or if you weren't following the playtest, you'll want to know that these conjuration spells are very, very different, and you'll want to see what they do. So I will be showing you the final versions of those. And then I'm going to do a video on just new spells. Some that you saw in the playtests and others that you didn't. And in the end, I'm going to show you about 50 spells on the screen. And if you are a patron of this channel, all those videos are already there for you to watch today. And any that haven't been made public yet have not been monetized yet. So go to Patreon to check those out. For those that aren't patrons, rest assured the videos will all be made public soon, but the YouTube algorithm, you got to play the game, so I have to release them sporadically. I do want to take a moment, though, to thank patrons quickly today. I'm recognizing Archmage level patrons, so thank you to Arden, Awesome Face, Calvin Morale, Christopher, Condor, Dash Panther, David Lotz, David W. Skibbins, Eric H., Eric P., Homowa, Ido, Isaac Leister, Jake Kimball, James Thomas, Jean-Baptiste Blanchette, Jeremy Brown, Jonathan Lexi, K.J. Aurelio, Nuts, Crocidian, Quath, Leonardo Gonzalez, Migish, Minnery, Reichenstahl, Rysquai, Sarek Steeleye, Starfall, Stephen Edmondson, TUM, The Algor Rhythm, Trex, and Shura. So today, I'm going to cover all the spells that stood out to me as notably needing rebalancing where I saw some progress. And in some of these cases, I think they could have gone further. But what we have, I think, in all these cases, in my opinion, is better than what we had in 2014. Some of these are bad spells that got better. And I am sorry to say, some of these are powerful spells that got worse or reined in. Though at least in my opinion, reining in these spells wasn't a bad thing. I think we all have lists in our head of things we want from the new rules, and my list is probably a little bit different than yours, and both of ours are probably a little bit different than the next person's. So I do think, we need to recognize that there isn't any one list of right or wrong choices or changes, but at least for me, the changes to spells in this video were steps in the right direction. Finally, this is not going to be an exhaustive list. I don't think I could do that. And I honestly don't think I could even get such a list in the time frame I have. There's just way too many spells with some rebalancing or clarifications for me to cover. These are just the ones for spells that I personally had an interest in, whether they would be quote unquote corrected. So we're going to cover a list of 15 spells right now in alphabetical order that had rebalancing in the 2024 Player's Handbook. So future me here, I'm doing a little edit because as I'm doing this video, I'm realizing that there's probably going to be some spells that you saw in the playtest or you heard about from Jeremy Crawford that had been improved, and I'm not going to have them in this video, and you're going to wonder if maybe they went back on those improvements, and I assure you they didn't. Spells that were improved in the playtest pretty much went through as is. Spells that Jeremy Crawford talked about, like Flame Strike, did have the buffs he talked about. So I didn't figure, being that there's so much to cover, that it was worth going over those things again. But don't take them not being on this video as meaning that it didn't happen. They did. So back to the video. And we are going to start with Barkskin. The old version is up on your screen, and I'm not going to go into details going over it again. But this spell suffers from being concentration when it obviously shouldn't be concentration. The armor class, it has weird wording. Like it says, your armor class can't be less than 16, which starts to have weird interactions when you do things like go behind cover and that kind of thing. And also, armor class 16, I mean, isn't a bad armor class, but you're going to make me concentrate for an hour. So this spell definitely needed rebalanced, and it has been. And not the rebalancing that we saw in the playtest. They went a different route. So here is the new version, and it has had several enhancements. So the first enhancement is the casting time is changed to a bonus action. It used to be an action to cast this spell. The duration has been changed. It used to be 1 hour with concentration. Concentration has been removed from this spell. And we see wording clarification. It just says, until the spell ends, the target's skin assumes mark-like appearance, and the target has an armor class of 17. So the armor class has been increased by 1, but also the whole can't be less than 17 is gone, and they got rid of that. So you're just going to have armor class 17. If you go behind cover, you're going to still get the benefit of that cover. So there's a clarification there as well. I don't think this is an overpowered spell at all, but I do think there's enough enhancements here that this is an okay spell now. So glad with that rebalancing. Next one. Up on your screen is the old Daylight spell. And, I mean, the spell's not terrible. It creates light in a pretty big area. My issue is mainly a pet peeve. I figure spells should do what their name implies. Daylight implies it's creating daylight. It's not. It's just creating light. So if you're going against something like a vampire that's affected by sunlight, daylight doesn't do anything for you, even though you would think it would. So that's a pet peeve of mine, and I'm glad to say they've addressed it. So here is the new Daylight spell. As we can see, it's still level 3, still an action. In fact, there's very few changes to this spell, except for, if you look, it says, for the duration, sunlight spreads from a point within range and fills a 60-foot radius sphere. So we are creating sunlight, and that is right in the text of the spell now. Great revision. Happy to see that. All right, next we have Divine Favor. So you might not be used to seeing this spell because it is just a little bit underwhelming. It adds a d4 to damage using your concentration for a minute. Bonus action to cast, though. Paladins got it, and it was kind of like the runt brother of Hex and Hunter's Mark. And Hex and Hunter's Mark aren't that great. But, you reduce the damage to d4, and that's pretty significant. Sure, it's not eating up your bonus action over and over again, but it certainly is on the round you cast it. So just a d4 doesn't feel like very much when you are expending a resource. So here is the new version, and it's short and sweet. Until the spell ends, your attack with weapons deal an extra d4 radiant damage on a hit. The change here is, look at the duration. Nothing about concentration. Yep, concentration has been removed from Divine Favor. That really does make it a much better spell. And I'm sorry. Yes, that's Forcecage you see up on your screen, the old version that's super overpowered and wins fights on round 1. I'm so sorry, but yes, they have rebalanced Forcecage, and I think that's a good thing, in my opinion. So let's take a look at the new Forcecage. There it is, a lot to go over, but the important things to note is it's still immobile, it's still invisible, it's still invulnerable. I thought they might add hit points to these kinds of spells. They did not. Would they notice the difference? Look at the duration. Used to be 1 hour, no concentration. They have added concentration to Forcecage. Otherwise, it's basically the same. Now, hang on there, buddy boy. Did you just say it was basically the same? Because look at the component. It says the component is consumed. This is a 1,500 gold piece component. And now it is consumed when you cast a spell. That's another huge nerf to add to Forcecage. I didn't even realize it. That's part of the danger of, you've got 400 different spells to be looking at, and you have a limited amount of time to do it, and so you miss these kinds of things. And I bet you I missed other stuff as well. But, wow, Forcecage with a 1,500 gold piece component that's consumed on casting. I don't know if they've gone too far on that one. But anyway, I'm here doing the editing, and I saw that, and I thought, I have to mention it, as it always has been. But adding concentration is a big nerf to Forcecage. Huge nerf. So, I'm sorry to say this, I'm glad to see it. Okay, up on your screen, Grasping Vine, the crappy ranger spell. 4th level spell. Remember, for a ranger, you got to be 13th level to get this spell, and it's going to be your biggest resource to cast it. And what does it do? It potentially pulls creatures, and it uses your bonus action each round to do it, and that's all it does. And it just, for the resource cost, it just is underwhelming. So I definitely took a look at Grasping Vine to see if it had been improved, and I'm glad to say they have improved Grasping Vine. So here is the new version, and most of the stuff has stayed the same, but there is an important enhancement. You conjure a vine that sprouts from a surface in an unoccupied space you can see within range. The vine lasts for the duration. Make a melee spell attack against a creature within 30 feet of the vine. On a hit, the target takes 4d8 bludgeoning damage. That wasn't in there before. This spell never did damage before, and is pulled 30 feet towards the vine. So it still does the same thing it used to, but now we're adding damage. And this is going to be a bonus action on subsequent turns, as well as the turn you cast it. So you're doing a 4d8 spell attack with your bonus action, plus the pulling. So I think that's a lot better than it used to be. Should also note, they've added upcasting to Grasping Vine. The number of the creatures the vine can grapple increases by 1 for each spell slot level above 4. So that didn't have upcasting at all before. That's a pretty good upcast as well. And yes, that's Hero's Feast up on your screen. Now, Hero's Feast, the balancing factor has always been that it has 1,000 gold piece material component cost, which is consumed, which is a lot. But I know I run a lot of one-shots. If you run a lot of one-shots, you'll know that if you're of the level that Hero's Feast comes into play, the impact of it is too high. So it can affect up to 12 creatures, and this is what they get. They get cured of all diseases and poison. Of course, usually this is cast before you go into all the dangerous stuff, so that's usually not a factor. They become immune to poison and being frightened, and they make all wisdom saving throws with advantage. Its hit point maximum also increases by 2d10, and it gains the same number of hit points. These benefits last for 24 hours. Where I find this spell really sucks is if I planned a one-shot where enemies do poison damage. If they do any poison damage, the groups that I run through that have Hero's Feast and the groups that run through that don't have Hero's Feast have massively different experiences. And I don't like that kind of impact on a one-shot that Hero's Feast can have. So here is the new version. You conjure a feast that appears on a surface in an unoccupied 10-foot cube next to you. The feast takes 1 hour to consume and disappears at the end of that time, and the beneficial effects don't set in until this hour is over. I mean, different wording, same thing. Up to 12 creatures can partake of the feast. A creature that partakes gains several benefits, which last for 24 hours. They have resistance to poison damage. That's the big change. And it has still immunity to the frightened condition and poison condition. Its hit point maximum also increases by 2d10, and it gains the same number of hit points. Do you notice something missing? Yeah, wisdom saving throws no longer have advantage, and poison immunity has been reduced to poison resistance. Still a pretty good buff, but not quite as overwhelmingly powerful as it was before. Alright, sound off below if you were crossing your fingers that you would see this spell up on your screen. Leomund's Tiny Hut is kind of infamous for being just way too powerful and making, achieving a long rest kind of trivial. Because the dome you create is indestructible. Nothing can go through it unless you want it to. Like, your stuff goes through it, their stuff does not. And of course, it's a ritual cast, so you don't even have to use a resource. Now, this is a case of a spell that has been rebalanced in the right direction, but I do think they could have gone further than they did. But at least there's an improvement here. So I'm just going to read the second paragraph here. Creatures and objects within the emanation, when you cast a spell, can move through it freely. That's the same. All other creatures and objects are barred from passing through it. That is the same. Spells of level 3 or lower can't be cast through it, and the effects of such spells can't extend into it. That has been nerfed, because originally it was all spells and all magical effects were barred from passing through it. So now it's just spells, and only spells of level 3 or lower. So at least something can get into this hut now, so that is an improvement. Now, I would have liked to have seen this thing get some hit points that could be destroyed. That still hasn't happened. If you don't have creatures that can, cast 4th or higher level spells, they're still basically blocked from Leomund's Tiny Hut entirely, which I think is really good for a ritual, but nevertheless, definitely better than the 2014 version. In my opinion, okay? If you are upset of spell nerfs, I get it, but I was looking for some spells to get nerfed. Alright, so Magic Weapon might not have been a spell that you had flagged as something that needed correction, but I did, and here's why. So, when I got my new player's handbook, one of the things I looked for is I went to the creature stat blocks at the end, and I looked for any creatures with resistance to attacks from non-magical weapons, like the Imp, for example. It's gone. You either have resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, or one of those, or you don't. There's no, non-magical thing anymore. That is gone from the game from as far as I can see, unless they have it in the monster manual. But certainly in the stat blocks in the back of the player's handbook, it appears to be gone. That makes Magic Weapon a worse spell, because Magic Weapon uses your concentration, and it gives you a +1 to hit and damage, which probably isn't worth concentration. But if you needed a Magic Weapon to bypass resistance or immunity, then it could be a worthwhile spell. But that's not going to be the case anymore. So then Magic Weapon kind of does need a buff, and it got one. So here's the new Magic Weapon, and based on the kind of buffing we've seen on other spells, it should be crystal clear what the difference is. Duration 1 hour, nothing about concentration. Concentration has been removed from the Magic Weapon spell. This makes this a much better spell. Especially, think about the Ranger that is often going to be concentrating on Hunter's Mark. They need some non-concentration options, and Magic Weapon is going to stack with your Hunter's Mark, which is going to make it pretty good. So, yeah, big improvement to Magic Weapon. So if you want a poster boy for crappy spells in the 2014 Player's Handbook, it is probably True Strike. But a close runner-up is Mordenkainen's Sword. This is a 7th level spell that uses concentration, and it just doesn't do very much damage. Now, it uses your bonus action, so it's not eating up your action, but I mean, you can upcast Spiritual Weapon, and it does more damage than Mordenkainen's Sword. And that's in the old version of Spiritual Weapon. Now it scales more quickly, so it just blows this version of Mordenkainen's Sword away. I am glad to say they have improved it. That's the good news. The bad news is they didn't improve it all that much, so I still think this is kind of a crap spell, to be honest. But it is better than the 2014 version, so it's still concentration. It still only lasts a minute. It's still a 7th level spell, but now it does 4d12 damage instead of 3d10 damage. So the damage has gone up somewhat significantly, but I still don't think this is worth a 7th level slot, in my opinion. But if you want to do some extra damage with your bonus action, you can get 4d12 with Mordenkainen's sword, and at least it's better than 3d10. But I still don't think this is a good spell. Now, here is my issue with Prismatic Spray. This is a 7th level spell, and you do have the possibilities of doing the indigo or violet rays, which are better. They can cause petrification or the blinded condition, so those are better, but the 1 through 5 aren't very good. 10d6 damage when you consider that you could be upcasting a fireball and do a lot more than 10d6 damage at this level. What would it be? 12d6 damage you would do with a fireball. So unless you roll an 8 and you get 2 rays, there's a really good chance that this is just going to be a really reduced version of what you could achieve with another 7th level blast spell. They have improved Prismatic Spray. Now, this is a big spell, so it's going to look very small on your screen, so I'm just going to tell you what the differences are. Not very many, but if you roll a 1 through 5, you're going to do 12d6 damage instead of 10d6 damage, which at least is equivalent to what you would achieve with an upcast fireball. Otherwise, I didn't notice any other changes to this spell. And here is a spell that had a more dramatic improvement, and that is Ray of Sickness. So this is a bad spell. It's a 1st level spell, and you make a ranged spell attack against a target. If you miss, nothing happens. On a hit, they take 2d8 poison damage, hurrah, hurrah, and then they get a saving throw. And if they fail that saving throw, then they're poisoned for a whole turn. And that really required a saving throw, that one effect. It's okay, but we already had to roll the hit. So this just isn't a good spell. And here is the new Ray of Sickness. It says you shoot a greenish ray at a creature within range, make a ranged spell attack against the target. On a hit, the target takes 2d8 poison damage and has the poison condition until the end of your next turn. So they have removed the saving throw. The poison condition automatically happens if you make the hit, which is the way it probably always should have been. This is now an okay spell, as long as you're firing it against something that's not immune to poison. This spell being up on your screen should be the smallest surprise in this entire video. Of course, they had to do something to rebalance Simulacrum. Simulacrum is infamous for being overpowered. And of course, it has the also infamous Wish/Simulacrum loop that allows you to make infinite simulacrums. So this it's just out of control, this spell. I'm not going to go over all the details. You probably have heard of Simulacrum, even if you've never seen it used in play. Now, I gotta tell you, in my opinion, they could have gone way further than they did. That said, the nerfing here is pretty substantial. So the big change here we're going to see in the 1, 2, 3rd paragraph. So let me read that out. The Simulacrum is friendly to you and creatures you designate. It obeys your commands and acts on your turn in combat. The Simulacrum can't gain levels, and it can't take short or long rests. That is new, and that is a huge nerf. What you could do before, let's say you're a diviner wizard and you create a Simulacrum. Well, that Simulacrum has Portent. And although they couldn't regain spell slots, because that was the only restriction, they can't regain spell slots, they could potentially take rest and recover hit points, even though there's wording on how they recover hit points in the spell. They didn't say that they didn't recover hit points during a rest, so that was kind of up to your DM. But also, they would recover Portent use, so they could just do Portent over and over and over again, and every day they could refresh it, and now all your limited use abilities are eventually going to run out on the Simulacrum, and they have no way to get them back. That is an improvement. It also makes it clear that the expensive way to heal them is the only way to heal them, and I'm glad to see that too. That's technically a nerf as well. In fact, a fairly substantial one. Now, another thing that I think they think is a nerf that really isn't is the 2nd paragraph. It uses the game statistics of the original creature at the time of casting, except it's a construct. Its hit point maximum is half as much. That's the same. And it can't cast this spell. So it prevents your Simulacrum from casting Simulacrum. And I think they might have assumed that's going to close the Simulacrum wish loop. But it doesn't. It doesn't actually close the Simulacrum loop. because the way the Simulacrum loop works is the Simulacrum doesn't cast Simulacrum. The Simulacrum casts Wish to simulate the Simulacrum spell. So they're not prevented from casting Wish, and so I'm not going to bother explaining how the Wish Simulacrum loop works. I have explained it before on this channel, but I don't endorse it because it's going to just wreck your campaign. So just don't do it. But if they wanted to close that loophole, they have not. The Simulacrum Wish loop still exists. However, there are some pretty substantial nerfs to Simulacrum. All right, so I've ragged on Swift Quiver a lot. So I have multiple problems with this spell. Concentration lasts a minute, and what it does basically is it gives you a bonus action where you can fire your bow twice, right? That's what it does. So you're a ranger, you reach your highest levels, level 17, so you actually get a 5th level slot. You cast Swift Quiver, and then you can fire twice with your bonus action. And I mean, twice with your bonus action is pretty good, but you can't even fire on the round you cast this because it requires a bonus action to cast. So you've already used your bonus action. So, in the old rules, you have Crossbow Expert to get a single bonus action attack. Well, you have to go 3 rounds before Swift Quiver gives you even 1 additional attack. And that's only if you maintained your concentration over that time. And that's a 5th level spell in your biggest resource. So really not a good spell. The change they made, I think, is pretty significant and important, but I don't think they went far enough. So here is Swift Quiver as it appears in the new player's handbook, and the important change here is right in the first sentence. When you cast a spell and as a bonus action until it ends, you can make 2 attacks with a weapon that fires arrows or bolts, such as a longbow or light crossbow. So what they're doing is on round 1, when you cast this spell, you get the extra attacks. The problem is it's still using concentration. They've kind of pigeonholed the ranger into using Hunter's Mark, especially at high levels, because they're going to get advantage on all their attacks. So if I'm a 17th level ranger and I cast Swift Quiver, I'm locking myself out of advantage on all my attacks. Still doesn't seem very good to me. So I really wish they had removed concentration from this spell. I think then it would be really solid. But as it is, I don't see concentrating on this when I'm getting that much from Hunter's Mark at 17th level. And the amusingly bad 9th level spell, Weird. So Weird is probably worse than the Fear spell, because the Fear spell causes the frightened condition, and then, the creatures have to run with their action, and Weird has no such restriction. So I just wonder why I wouldn't cast Fear instead. Potentially you can do a little bit of psychic damage later on. That's because they're getting repeated saving throws for this, and it's not a whole lot of damage. So, yeah, Weird is just bad. It's a bad, bad spell, and yes, they have buffed it. Alright, so a lot of it remains the same, but if we read it here, it says you try to create illusory terrors in others' minds. Each creature of your choice within a 30-foot radius sphere centered on a point within range makes a wisdom saving throw. So that is the first buff, because the original version had friendly fire. So if you had allies in the area, they could be affected by the Weird spell. No friendly fire anymore. Alright, and then it says the 30-foot radius sphere centered on a point within range. They make a wisdom saving throw. On a failed save, a target takes 10d10 psychic damage. That is entirely new. There was no damage when you first cast the Weird spell in the old version. Now you're going to get 10d10 right away. And they have the frightened condition for the duration, and on a successful save, they take half as much damage, but that's it. So 10d10 damage as a boost. That's pretty significant. A frightened target makes a wisdom saving throw at the end of each of its turns. On a failed save, it takes 5d10 psychic damage. It used to be 4d10, so that's gone up as well, though that's not as dramatic. And then on a successful save, the spell ends on the target. Is this a great 9th level spell now? No, but it's not comically bad anymore. 10d10 damage is nothing to write home about at 9th level. I mean, if you're casting lower level spells, it is, but for a 9th level spell, it's not. Think about Meteor Swarm doing 40d6 damage. But it's something, and I wouldn't say this is comically bad anymore. It's still, I'd say, one of the weaker 9th level spells, but it certainly has been brought quite a bit closer. Actually going to throw in a honorable mention here into the mix as I'm editing, because as we were going over Weird, I remembered that Weird was based on Phantasmal Killer. In fact, it's kind of like an area of effect Phantasmal Killer. And that's why Weird's so bad, is because Phantasmal Killer is so bad. So I just looked at Phantasmal Killer again, and I originally planned not to include this because, although it has been buffed, like it says, on a failed save, the target takes 4d10 psychic damage, which it didn't used to. Just like with Weird, if they failed the initial save, there was no damage. They had to fail multiple saves to take damage. But I noticed there's another buff here, because I double-checked it to see if there had been any other changes, and it says it takes 4d10 psychic damage and has disadvantage on ability checks and attack rolls for the duration. Notice it doesn't do the frightened condition, and I'm looking here, and I don't see anywhere that says if a creature is immune to being frightened, that it's immune to Phantasmal Killer. It's not there. So Phantasmal Killer no longer cares if they're immune to the frightened condition, which is another buff to it. So that's not bad, right? I still don't think this is a great spell, but it definitely got enough better that I think I should at least mention it in this video. And the last spell I'm going to cover is Witch Bolt. And if you're thinking, why didn't he talk about this spell that's in my head that needed rebalancing? Well, you might see it in my next video for spells that didn't get rebalanced. But Witch Bolt is bad and needed rebalancing. So here's what happens with Witch Bolt. It's a concentration spell. You make a ranged spell attack. If you hit, they take a d12 lightning damage. And then on subsequent turns, you can use your action to give them another d12 lightning damage. Of course, if you miss with the original attack, this spell does nothing. And that's basically what it does. It has other problems as well, but they have improved it fairly significantly. So this is the new Witch Bolt up on your screen. It's still concentration for a minute. It says a beam of crackling energy lances towards a creature within range, forming a sustained arc of lightning between you and the target. Make a ranged spell attack against it. On a hit, the target takes 2d12 lightning damage. On each of your subsequent turns, you can make a bonus action to deal the 1d12 lightning damage to the target automatically, even if the first attack missed. The spell ends if the target is ever outside the spell's range or it has total cover from you, and the initial damage is increased by a d12 for each spell slot level above 1. So two big improvements here. The first is the initial damage is doubled, right? Used to be 1d12, now it's 2d12. And second, if you miss, the spell doesn't do nothing. You can still inflict the d12 on the subsequent turns, and it's only a bonus action. So that's not too bad for a first level spell. Yeah, I don't think that's bad. And I don't think this has become a super powerful spell, but I could see casting it. I might actually take this Witch Bolt. So those are the spells that kind of stuck out to me as being rebalanced. Now, I do need to say that other spells have been buffed that I didn't mention in this video or nerfed. But those were spells that, just didn't really strike me as the main ones that needed it. So we are going to see a bunch of spells in my next video that I do think needed it that didn't get it. So that will be my next video. Fortunately, that is going to be a smaller list than today. So, somebody asked what kind of percentage of spells do I think got rebalancing. Pretty good. I'd say of the spells that I thought needed rebalancing, most of them were addressed, but there were a number that weren't. And there's a very small number that had some really weird changes that I don't think helped at all. So I will cover those in my next video, and then I'm going to get into that other stuff that I mentioned earlier in the video. So thank you for watching, and stay tuned. There's more to come. For now, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.